This is John Elder of Prayer Builders in Winona, Minnesota. Today we're in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, going through verse by verse. We are actually down at verse 4 or verse 3, but let's go ahead and read starting verse 1. I think you're going to find some of these things today. Feels like Paul's actually speaking a lot of things here that could apply to us today. He says, "Furthermore, we beseech you, brethren," verse 1, "and exhort you by the Lord Jesus, that as you've received of us how you ought to walk and to please God, so you would abound more and more," and be growing in it, basically. And then it says, "For you know what the commandments or what the messages were that we gave you by the Lord Jesus." And then he says down at verse 3, now this is interesting. Let's just go ahead and read the verse. He says, "This is the will of God, even your sanctification." He said, "This is the will of God, even your sanctification, that you should abstain from fornication." Now, I don't know how many times I've heard people say, people have asked me, my wife and I, we've been in the ministry for a while, since 1986, and I don't know how many times I've been asked by people, how do I know the will of God? How can I hear the will of God? How can I know the will of God for myself? Well, this is a really cool verse, because it's actually showing you that we've got to do what God's already said. The will of God is that we do what he's already said. Paul said, he said, "You know what commandments we gave you by the Lord Jesus," in verse 2. And in the very next verse, some of those verses must have been related to this. So that meant when Paul was there, when he was there, all these communities that Paul was in planting churches, Paul was planting churches amongst the Gentiles, who had all kinds of cultic traditions. They were probably sexual immorality. There was probably no standards. Up to that point, they were not given, these regions and Gentile regions were not given over to Judeo principles, Jewish principles. So he said, "You know the commandment that we gave to you," in verse 2, "for this is the will of God." Now, and this was something he had previously covered with them. So we're going to see this section where he just comes right out of the box, and just hits them right in the face with this. In this one line, this is a real short verse. "This is the will of God, even your sanctification." Now, sanctification means to basically, for something to be set apart, something to be unmixed and unmingled with anything else. Not only that, but if you look up that word, like in Strong's Concordance, the word sanctification has to do with purity. Purity. When my wife and I, we live in a small town, and they've actually had issues with their water before, just because of all the farms around us and stuff like that. But we've got a pretty nice filtration system on our faucet, and we have a water facility that actually purifies our water and stuff out there too in our small community. But pure water. And I'll tell you what, if my wife, our water purification is hooked up on our cold side. If any hot water gets mingled in that and I taste it, I can take a taste of that water and I know it was not pure water. I can taste it. If I take a drink off of the hot side of the water, I can totally taste it. The two do not taste the same. And this is what Paul said. He says, "This is the will of God, even your sanctification." God's will is for us to be in purity. And we already were learning earlier in some previous verses about the love of God and those things. Well, right now, he's getting down to some very specific things. He says, this is God's will, even your purity, that you should abstain from all types of fornication. That you should abstain from fornication. Now, what fornication is, I mean, and that word gets used in a lot of ways, but basically that is like probably in the Greek, that is the most general term for anything sexually immoral. I mean, that is the word for this. And when you're looking at this, it means anything sexually immoral, and it says to abstain. That word abstain means to withhold yourself from, or to refrain from, or abstain. Basically, don't go there. Don't be doing it. Today, we're living in a day, like there was a day where sexually immoral things. And I mean, how do you judge where something is moral or sexually immoral? Sexually moral or sexually immoral? Well, that all has to do with marriage, because that's where that is connected. That's what defines it. Anything, fornication is anything outside the bounds of marriage. That would be sexual in nature. But Paul right here was saying, this is God's will. God's will is for you to be pure and not be given to any of this stuff. Why? Because when you do, I mean, it just starts shutting down the call, starts shutting down the plan of God. That kind of stuff would take over in your thoughts. It could rule your life. It will rule you wherever you're going. I mean, we need to be walking in freedom, especially when we're ministering to people. We need to be, when we're out doing things and doing things for God, our hearts and our thoughts and our motives and everything should be given to God, and he faced this off straight up front. Some people say, oh, well, the Bible doesn't talk about sexual immorality, this stuff. That's what this is right here. Ever you see that word, that's what it's dealing with. And in upcoming days, we're going to be seeing more of this, because he keeps talking about it in these verses, which meant it must have been a problem. So anyway, and he must have got that from prayer, because he hasn't seen them for a while. So anyway, I just want to encourage you. We want to be blameless. We want to be living and walking pleasing of the Father and being ready when Jesus comes back. Because I want you to know this, he is coming back.